Hi, I'm Patrick Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to this show is that Favro customers are some of the most innovative companies in the world. Enterprises wanting to be more agile, software as a service companies scaling fast, and game developers and publishers wanting to master live ops. So we get to know some truly inspiring leaders in product development, marketing, operations, sales, executive management. And what we do here is that we interview them about leadership so we can all learn from them. Let's go.
All right, and we are live, with Christina. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is the last one, before Christmas for me. So I'm a little bit extra excited. And straight after this, we are hosting a big get-together for game developers here in Vilnius. So it's a day of intense conversations, and that's awesome.
That's great. That's great. Now, do you say Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas? What do you say for the holidays?
Here, I think both here and in Sweden, where I'm from, and where Favro is headquartered, I think we are saying Happy Christmas. I do know that in America there's a bit of debate on exactly how to do this. We haven't got into that conversation yet over here. So it's still a very uncontroversial issue.
Yeah, I usually say Happy Merry Everything because then you kind of got it all covered.
Yeah, that's awesome. But hey, we have such an interesting topic here today. But before we jump into that, for the ones who doesn't know you, it would be great to just get a little bit of the story, how you got into this industry and you got to where you are today. You're obviously you have a very impressive track record. I mean, you built fantastic companies, and it's hard to avoid the topic that it's not that many women leaders in the position you're in. So when we talk about we need more role models to get better quality in the industry. I mean, well, here we got one.
Oh, well, thank you.
but we have been talking a lot about that on the podcast with others. So but just for inspiration for anyone listening right now, I mean, can you just share a little bit about your journey getting to where you're today?
Sure. Well, I never intended to lead a video game company. That was not my grand strategy in life. Actually, when I was young, I was a music major in college and I wanted to be a rock star, and that didn't work out. So here we are making video games. And but I live in Northern California, and I've grown up here and spent my whole life around technology, because when you live in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, basically Northern California, you're just by osmosis, you get a ton of technology visibility, and there's just a buzz about tech in this area. And so when I started my career, I was really interested in consumer technology, and then I grew in that and kind of moved up the ladder within a couple different software companies that were primarily doing productivity software. And I started a couple companies. I'm very entrepreneurial, which sometimes means you're not employable by other people. And so that was kind of true for me. I am much more comfortable in an entrepreneurial arena. And so I started a couple different technology companies, but always within consumer technology. And so it actually worked really well moving into video games, because I actually didn't look at it as a video game. I wasn't afraid of entering the industry as a woman, even though it's not very, not very popular, and it's not very common to be a woman within tech in general, and especially not in video games. But I really looked at video games in the early years as just another piece of consumer technology to bring to market. And what was interesting is that that's basically true. So it was easy for me to use the skills I already had in consumer technology and apply them to video games. but actually there was so much more about video games. It was really exciting that that I really loved it and just stayed in this industry and continued to grow the company. So I started it in my house, Maximum Games, and we shipped our first game in 2010, and then continued to grow that company on a bootstrapped basis all the way through till December of last year, when I sold the company to Zordix, is a listed company in Sweden. And so now we're quite a bit bigger as a group, and we have basically we cover the entire value chain of video game creation, development, publishing, lifecycle management, channel management, of everything that has to do with a video game in the PC and console space. And we have studios all over Europe and in the US and in South America. And then we also have publishing entities in UK, France, and the US.
No, it is quite an impressive group, and I think the fact that based out of Sweden, we have Embracer, which is very, very big. It maybe hides a little bit of fact that there's actually more players that had that whole value chain as you were speaking about. But I have two follow-up questions on this. One, how did you pick the name Maximum Games?
It's so funny. It again, especially as an entrepreneur, and you're an entrepreneur, so you know this, is that when you're going through those discussions on what to call the company and how do we want to make it perfect and how do we want to make sure it communicates our brand and our idea and how we want to show up in the world. But you're also very limited by what domains are available and what is trademarkable and all of those things that are like really practical issues that you have to deal with when you're coming up with the name. And what we really wanted to, when we started the company, it was actually called Maximum Family Games. And we wanted to communicate that we had games that were for the whole family. And so we wanted a big, expansive word like maximum. And then we wanted it to be, kind of family oriented in the very beginning, because our first games were kind of DS, Nintendo DS and 3DS games that were a little bit more family friendly. But we had to drop the family pretty early on in the company's existence, because we had all kinds of different games, core games, and the family just didn't really match with the company anymore. So we kept the maximum because we wanted to keep the expansive nature. And we really think that that's true of Maximum Games even today, in that we really believe that we expand the world and the revenue opportunities with video games and the maximum revenue channels possible.
And my second follow-up question on that. So was it, maybe you can, allowed to say this, but was it like part of the deal when the company was acquired that you would be the CEO of the bigger group, or how?
No, everybody knew that I was going to be on the executive team when the transaction happened. I think that on the other side of the transaction, what the board realized was that this new group, which was really transformative in 2021, it started as a very small studio. Zordix started as a very small studio, acquired a couple other studios, and then within about 18 months did 5 acquisitions. And so the board wanted to have somebody in as CEO who was going to be able to lead that integration, that foundation building, and set strategy for the years to come. And so then I took over at the end of February, beginning of March is when I became CEO.
I think that's kind of a yes to my question, but fair enough. Let's move on to our topic of today. So, for the ones in the audience who listen to our podcast, this year, we've been talking a lot about how to build a strong culture. When growing a game studio, and when we had a pre-conversation, you had a very interesting perspective, around how to use our gamer skills. And we're talking now not only about the leadership, position. We're also talking about, from someone, who's let's say a new team member. And I just thought that you had such interesting perspectives on this. And since most of us who are in the industry do play games ourselves, I think this is just perfect. So it's like a Christmas present now for us all. So I'm gonna shut up and just leave it to you here to just expand a little bit on those thoughts.
Sure. I think when we talked about it, what I am really passionate about is helping, especially kind of Gen Z and workers that are entering the workforce, or even, millennials that are already in the workforce, as they're looking at expanding their career, as they're looking at how do I show up at work and how do I accomplish the tasks. One of the things that we really lean into within Maximum Games and Zordix overall is this idea of using the skills that we already have as a gamer to inform how we show up at work. And I'm just going to tell a quick story about how this kind of came to be, and this idea of how we build culture around this idea. And it really came from a conversation that I had with my son. My oldest son was working in the business, and he was working as like kind of an assistant in the production area of Maximum Games. And he came up to me at work one day and he's like, "Hey, I leveled up today." And I said, "Oh," which is very normal because I have 3 boys and they talk to me about what they're playing in their games all the time. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, I leveled up today." And I was like, "Oh, what were you playing?" He's like, "No, I leveled up at work." And I said, "What do you mean?" And what he had done was completed a localization pass for one of the games, which means he took the words out, got them translated, got them put back into the game, and tested it. And so that game loop, work loop, which looked like a game loop, made him feel like he leveled, like he cleared a level, like he accomplished a quest, like, he added to his skill tree. And that's the feeling that he had. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. That how else can we create those moments of feeling like you leveled at work? And that really was the beginning of this whole concept of approaching work with a gamer's lens, and approaching how we're looking at doing things in the same way that we approach gaming, and both creating games and playing games. And so the idea here is like, let's talk about failure for one thing. When you fail at a game, you die, you don't clear the level, you didn't kill that boss, whatever, you're so excited to start again because you inherently know all of the things that you learned from that moment. You inherently know that I need this different weapon, or I need to go craft this spell, or I need to look around this corner because there's a bad guy over there and I need to go right, not left. There's all of these things that you learned. And so you're really excited to start again. Nobody gets mad and doesn't try to clear the level. We have entire games that are, built on failure, that you're never going to clear the level. You just see how far you're going to go. Right. And so I think that that's one of the things that you can tell people, like, hey, failure, actually look at any kind of failure you have at work with the same lens that you look at when you don't clear a level. What can you do different? Which way can you turn that's going to help you accomplish that task? And then it gives people real excitement about how to go to the next level. So failure is just one way that a gamer's lens helps us do this, but there's tons more. Should I keep going?
I definitely want you to keep going, but I just have to ask you, like, in between here, how do you, how do you see this yourself? Because there's definitely a lot of this in being CEO.
Absolutely, it's so true, and I think that that's one of the things that I preach a lot about this. I feel like I talk all the time about, how you can take all of these skills that we have as gamers and apply them to our work life. And I know that it is hard to do that, but I'm telling you, just the quick reframe in your brain of telling yourself, I didn't clear that level, instead of I failed, or I didn't finish that boss fight. I need a new weapon, or I need to go craft something. Just telling yourself that absolutely reframes the challenge that you're experiencing. And you start looking at all of these different struggles that you have as CEO in the same way that you would look at a game. I am always struggling with resource management, right? As a CEO, you have limited resources, you have, employees, you have games that you're going to want to work with, you have speed and time that you have to deal with in order to get a project out. When you approach it from a gamer's lens, that's what you do in game. You do resource management. You look at a health bar, you look at, whatever kind of game you're having, there's something about resource management. So approaching resource management in the same way that you would approach it in a game, you're like, okay, I need more resources over here. So what am I going to do that? Am I going to go, hunt for something over here, or, kind of depending on whatever your game is, you're going to be able to use the principles that you use in approaching that game in work life. And I think resource management is another one. I talk a lot because I'm a woman. I end up talking a lot to moms about kids that are playing video games. And usually moms are coming up and they're like, oh, my kids are playing games. Should I let them play games? I'm like, absolutely. You should be letting your kids play games. Look at the things that they learn when they're playing a game. What other thing can you do with your child where they're learning strategic decision-making and resource management and ramifications of their decisions? What other play are you actually, letting them do where they get all of that really valuable life skill?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, there's a pretty big debate actually in Sweden around, how, especially, boys is doing certain sports, learning certain skills, which is kind of prepping them for kind of, life as a manager and executive. And then it's kind of like, well, what is the equivalent, for girls? And very often they, you bring up things like, for example, taking care of a horse, which is probably correct, but it's a much more, less financially intensive, thing you can do, which is play the right games,
Exactly.
You have a really, really good point there.
Yeah, but there's so many more things within games that you're learning about, how to show up at work. And another one that we talk a lot about is playing multiplayer, because there's a million business books that have been written about creating a functional team and how to work on a team. And there's software that's been created to help manage a team. But you know what is a really highly functional team? Anytime you're playing a game, and when you're playing multiplayer, you definitely understand how important the different roles are. Nobody is sad because they're the AD carry and somebody else is, the tank or whatever, that you just naturally fall into those different roles. And you have a high level of respect for all of those different roles, because you know that you cannot accomplish the quest without everybody really having a highly functional experience in their roles. So we actually already know how to be a really good teammate. We actually know how to fall into our roles and create respect around those roles and learn skills around those roles pretty easily without tons of books being written about it. We just know how to do it within a game. And if we use those same tools and we frame working on a team in the same way that we would frame playing multiplayer, we're already, 80% of the way there to a functional team. And I think that that's another way that you can, even just by saying, instead of we're on a project together or we're on a team, we can just say we're playing multiplayer. Who's who? And you can kind of create those roles very, very naturally, just like you would in a game.
I have to ask you something here. There's been a bit of a conversation within kind of HR around gamification of being an employee. And, I I guess there's a difference here between the gamification of the work career, everything from the recruitment process to onboarding and so forth, to what you're talking about. Can you expand a bit on the difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think that gamification is not exactly what I'm talking about. Gamification, I think, is in sometimes a cheesy or not great attempt to make what is otherwise not a very fun process fun. And so what they do is they let you kind of choose paths and they try to gamify some process of like onboarding is a great example within HR, and make it more of a game because and really the only way that you're making it a game is that you're giving the person who's getting onboarded a little bit of agency to make choices and things like that. But the gamification of that is pretty light, right? And I am not talking about gamifying your work. What I am talking about is understanding that you already have a lot of the skills to be successful at work because you're already utilizing those within game. And so it's really not gamifying work, but using all of these skills that you have as a gamer. So my idea is, instead of trying to kind of awkwardly create gamification within the work environment, I think we would have a much better result by encouraging people to approach work with a gamer's lens and look at work in the same way that you look at accomplishing something within game. And I think that if we did that, it also gives us a lot more confidence, right? You were not afraid of entering a project and you're like, how am I going to manage this project when I have limited resources, but I have to accomplish this big task, this big quest, this big mission, however, whatever word you want to use. If you approach that in the same way that you would approach that challenge within a game, you would actually get pretty excited about finding those resources. You'd start to get really creative, right? You'd start to look under things within the environment that you wouldn't normally look for. And I think sometimes at work, people show up and they just want a plan. Like, here, go do this, and then you will accomplish your task. But in a game, that wouldn't be fun, right? In a game, you want to go explore. You want to look at the environment. You want to turn over that rock. You want to go see what's out there. And I think that if we had that as we approach work, that's not gamifying work. That's just changing our mindset and changing our approach, approaching work through a gamer's lens.
So if I can ask let's say, a somewhat challenging question there, do you think that these are contradictory, or do you think that they can go hand in hand? And I'll tell you why I asked the question. So if you take, for example, career path, one of the things that tends to be a very, let's say, typical struggle, is that you want to have a career path for everyone. If you take coders, you want them to have an equal career path as someone who uses more of a management track. And by visualizing, if you equal the levels there, it's like, okay, you chose, that management level, but it's actually the same level as if you go that route. That would be, let's say, one example of how a bit of gamification would be supporting, making, people that doesn't want to choose a management track feel like they're equally, equally valued. Do you see these potentially working together, or is there a contradiction?
No, I think it can work together. I think that especially in that kind of application that you just described, which is basically a skill tree where you're leveling up your character, you can have that be very clearly visualized depending on who is in the organization and what their particular career path is. You can kind of gamify that career path and make it look just like a skill tree. And in many ways, that helps that person also understand that you do have to work through these different skills in order to level up. How many times are you playing a game and you ran into a boss too early, right? You ran into a boss fight too early. You did not have the skills. You did not have the weaponry. You didn't have what you needed in order to accomplish that. You have to go back and work those steps. The same way, sometimes people get frustrated in their career, right? They want to jump up to the top. But if you're talking to them about it in the same way that, you approach a game, you understand that, here's the skill tree for this position and what you need to do. And that gamification of your career path, plus the reinforcement of telling that employee to approach work as a gamer would and kill the skill tree, move it all the way up. I think that those can actually work very well hand in hand.
All right, super. And final question. Now, one way to promote this kind of thinking is, of course, what you're doing right now. You just talk about it, right? But are there other ways? Do you have other tips, for leaders that share this mindset that you have? How to promote this. How to make it transparent that this is how we're thinking. How to maybe even use this as a way to attract some of the best talent. Because to be honest, I mean, working in a company with the CEO, things like this, it sounds pretty nice.
Yeah, I would love to be able to expand this outside of just the video game community and video game companies, because I think this, having this conversation with you and probably a lot of your listeners that are very familiar with video games and video game companies, you can apply it pretty easily to work. I would really love to bring this to a broader audience, and I'm working on a book that is going to do exactly that. Because even if you're not in the video game industry, you are employing gamers. You have gamers on your staff, no matter what kind of industry you're in. And so if I can kind of get the rest of, business leadership excited about encouraging people to use the skills that they already have as they approach their work, I think that everybody will be a lot happier at work too.
That sounds great. And I do promise that, once the book is out, I will make sure to promote it.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
All right, cool. It's been so great talking to you. Our time is up. I got to go meet a bunch of game developers now at the meetup, Christmas drinks.
Right.
And, I'm looking forward to speaking more with you, in the next year. Maybe we get more topics to expand on. But until then, huge thanks.
Thank you.
And, thank you to all of you who's been listening. And I really hope to see you in 2023.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, you know what to do. Share it in your social media so more people can take part and learn. And one more thing. Check out Favro Academy on favro.com for many more learnings. Thanks for tuning in.